Now, to me, there is absolutely no doubt that these vaccines, including the AstraZeneca ones, save lives. I mean, the scoreboard doesn't lie. Not one of the 29 people to die in the Sydney outbreak was fully vaccinated. Not one of the 57 people now in intensive care was fully vaccinated. And that's why I thought the New South Wales Premier today showed us the way out of these endless lockdowns, or at least hinted at it. And I think the way out should come relatively soon, sooner than the Prime Minister thinks, because it's not about getting zero infections. It's about stopping people from getting so sick with the virus that they die or they need intensive care. And vaccines so far are doing that job.
It's not so much the number of cases we have, it's the number of cases we have that aren't vaccinated. Because vaccination is keeping people out of ICU. It's keeping people out of hospital. As Dr. Totro will stress, it's a relief to us that both vaccines are holding up really well. Both vaccines are demonstrating keeping people out of hospital, keeping people out of harm's way, and also reducing the spread.
Now, by Christmas, we should have more than enough vaccine for everyone that wants it. The government's just getting Moderna, 10 million doses to add to the AstraZeneca and the Pfizer, 10 million by Christmas. So there's plenty. But the Prime Minister today said he won't make them compulsory, even though there's some virus hesitancy, fear-mongering, or he won't make them, rather, compulsory for everyone.
It is important that Australians know that we are not going to seek to impose a mandatory vaccination program in this country by some other means. There have been some isolated cases which have already been identified, quarantine workers and aged care workers. They are the only areas that any states or territories or the Commonwealth has suggested that we're providing some statutory or public health order enforcement of such a mandating.
Right, but Scott Morrison did support some employers saying no jab, no job, if their business needs it, like aged care homes do. But he's so scared of seeming like he's forcing vaccines on anyone that he won't even indemnify those employers if a vaccination, heaven forbid, does go wrong. So is this going to be enough to get enough Australians vaccinated to protect us all? Now, Australia's most famous philosopher, Peter Singer, author of the very influential book Animal Rights, says the government should go much further. He says it should make it compulsory to get vaccinated, just like it's compulsory to wear a seatbelt in a car. Peter Singer joins me now. Peter Singer, thank you so much for coming on the show again. Really appreciate your time as always. Why force people to get vaccinated if they don't want or don't trust the vaccine?
Well, the problem is that people who don't want the vaccine are actually putting others at risk, unless, of course, they're hermits. I wouldn't force hermits to get the vaccine, but anybody who wants to go out in the community, to use public transport, to go to the cinema, basically, if they're not vaccinated, then there's a higher probability that they're spreading the vaccine, and they're putting people at risk. In addition, as you rightly said, they're making lockdowns more likely, because if we had pretty much everybody vaccinated, we'd be more willing, I think, to take the risk of the virus spreading, because we would know that very, very few people, if any, would need to go into intensive care, or worse still, would die from the disease.
Now, there's one point there that I want to tease out, because I think that's an important one. But just go back to the forcing people to have a vaccine, first of all. I mean, how does that work? Do we actually hold people down while we forcibly inject them, the ones that don't want it?
No, I hope we're not going to do that. I think we're just going to say, as I said, there are things that you can't do if you don't get vaccinated. So, we could have cinemas could require that you show your proof of vaccination before you enter. Inspectors could come onto public transport, as they now do, to show that you've paid, to see that you've been vaccinated if you're on public transport. We could make it very, very difficult for people not to be vaccinated. I wouldn't want to actually grab them and hold them down while we stick a needle in their arm.
Look, I don't mind businesses where it's relevant to their operation, like they've got a confined space or nervous staff or nervous customers, to say, look, no jab, you don't come in. I don't mind that. It's a different thing to say mandate for a government to mandate everyone must or else. And I'm wondering what the or else would be. Now you say, well, if we do that, it's like wearing a seatbelt, but it isn't really, isn't it? Because I mean, a seatbelt, that just goes over my body. A vaccine goes into my body. And for people that don't trust vaccines, that is all the difference in the world.
Well, there were people who didn't trust seatbelts. I'm old enough to remember that debate. And there were people who said, oh, what if I have an accident and the car bursts into flames and I get stuck in the seatbelt and I can't get out? So, there were somewhat similar fears. I'm not saying the situations are identical, but there were somewhat similar fears that seatbelts might not work well and might actually imperil your lives. But of course, all the evidence was that you were in much, much more danger if you didn't wear a seatbelt. And the public has accepted that now. So I think the case is, in a way, even stronger in the case of vaccination, because you are putting other people at risk in the way that not wearing a seatbelt is foolish for your own interests, but it doesn't really put other people at risk.
Yeah, at least with a seatbelt, I can take it off if I really think it's dangerous and walk down the street. But with an injection, it's in your body. Now, I trust the vaccines, but some people don't. And I'm a bit wary of forcing them to. Now, I'm more of a libertarian, Peter. I'm just wondering, I also believe in people taking personal responsibility. Now, by Christmas, we're going to have more vaccine than we need for everyone that wants it. Isn't, in fact, the best way out of this to say, vaccines work, I'm trying to persuade you, I've given you the vaccine, it's free. If you haven't got vaccinated by Christmas or whatever, it's your fault if you then die, and the rest of us should be free to protect ourselves by saying you can't come into our business or our restaurant where it's relevant, right? Unless you are vaccinated. It's your call. Isn't that a far better way out than, and in a way that respects people's freedom?
Well, we did again have the same arguments with seatbelts. People said, isn't it my business? And I responsible? Okay, if I get badly injured or even killed in a car accident while I'm sitting on my seatbelt, that's my responsibility. But in fact, we're not that hard-hearted as a society that we're going to say to people, they have an accident, they need to go into the intensive care unit, they weren't wearing a seatbelt. We're not going to say to them, sorry, we don't have a bed for you because you should have been wearing your seatbelt. And similarly, we're not going to say to people, no, we're not going to have a bed for you because you should have been vaccinated. And I wouldn't want us to be like that. I think that is too callous, really.
No, I didn't say that. It's the use of compulsion, I think, it's going to backfire. I don't know it's a right, and it tramples on people's freedom. I think people should be free to be ornery, and rebellious and all that. They should be, and who knows? There's a 1 in 1,000 chance they could be right about vaccines. So I don't know. But listen, I appreciate you. I appreciate you having the argument with me. Thank you so much indeed.